Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this podcast. This is number 3 in a series of 3 that's been taking a look at the challenges facing organizations as they've been trying to widen their access governance stance. Access management continues to evolve and encompass the need for new requirements. So, the capabilities of the solutions, the processes, and the technologies we have been using need to evolve as well. I'm Chris Williams, a business solutions manager with Avexis Software. And we enable organizations to ensure that only the right people have the appropriate levels of access to your most precious commodities, your data and your information. So today we're going to conclude our series with taking a look at a mission-specific approach, a slight departure from the way we've done things. And if you followed the previous 2 podcasts, you know that we've been building up to this, and it's just kind of a new way of looking at things. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. One of the things that we want to do, immediately speaking, is take a look at life cycle controls. Now, this has been going on in IT for quite a while. It's been going on in the business community for a long time. Business side, if you take a look at ERPs, we know we have had to change the way we've done things when we utilize technology to get things done. Going beyond just the simple predecessor-successor kind of relationship or a Gantt process series to actually look at how things live when we begin to use technology. And by live, I do mean how we manage the entire system of processes and modifications of data and of expected outcomes. Okay, so when we talk about access governance, it's kind of the same thing that we've done in the past, but we're moving towards it in a discipline set that quite hasn't gotten there previously. And I think part of this might be because in previous activities, at least in some of the communications I've had over the past 15 years or so, scope has always been an issue. A lot of organizations are still going by, let's say, about a 25-75% rule, 25% coverage base, 75% not covered explicitly, with one-off solutions addressing that other 75% that's out there on the fringe. So if we're really going to take a look at some lifecycle controls, we have to examine how many different environments we want to manage and the effectiveness of that management, and whether or not our one-off activities for non-included environments is a hindrance, or if it's causing us not to be as effective in managing the life cycle of that 25% as it could be. Okay? So once we've got the scope, we know what we want to address. I think one of the big things we need to do also is incorporate as much automation as possible. Automation, as everybody will recognize, it drives efficiencies and it takes the human element away from the equation, so latencies are reduced and that kind of thing. But really what it does is it makes life easier for everybody. And the easier we can make things as far as automating background processes, streaming off notifications, doing approvals and workflows and the like of this, well, that just makes the entire process easier to manage, easier to report, easier to audit, easier to defend. So we need to include that within the lifecycle process also. And of course, we want to talk about inclusion within the larger environment. By inclusion, what I mean is something that I was referring to in the second podcast of this series, where I was looking at neighboring disciplines of IT activities. One in particular would be security information and event management. Most certainly we'd want to include governance with that as much as possible. A great example would be, let's say that the SIEM solution noticed that there was an anomaly, an occurrence, and that can trigger off some automation within the governance suite, perhaps through a notification and an immediate action of a temporary revocation against an ID that perhaps should not be accessing an entitled commodity that's out there. So there's a lot of integration processes that we need to think about also for the life cycle itself. Well, one of the important things we have to keep in mind is no matter what we put into the scope here, no matter what we're trying to manage, the automation we put in place, the integration process is sitting behind it, is that no matter how wondrous a solution may be, if it's too complicated, it won't be used, right? And access governance is a tool that is used by the business community, not by IT technical people. And it's got to be something that fits into their workday efficiently, something that provides the access capabilities that they need for doing their specific job. Because remember, a lot of the people that are doing reviews, that's not their full-time gig. They may be supervisors of the department, they may be managers or directors, and doing the governance is an additional duty that they have to perform. So let's make it easy for them, so that it gets done in a regular and routine fashion whenever possible. And if it's easy, they're going to do it. We can stay on time, and of course that just drives the governance lifecycle through to completion. Okay. Now, in our previous series podcast, we've been talking about how do we get there? How do we move forward? And what I'd like to do is go ahead and just demonstrate a methodology, um, a framework, a pathway, whatever you want to call this, just some basic areas of governance disciplines that we need to address in a sequential kind of order. And then we're going to move on to some of the benefits of doing governance in this fashion. So we're going to start off with something I think that's extremely elemental, and we all dig this, right? This is all about being able to see it, understand it, and do something with the data that is presented to us as far as being reviewers, testors, certifiers of the access requirements that we have. And it comes down to a couple of basic things, right? You can't do anything with it unless you can get it. You've got to be able to collect all of those entitlements. And I think I was using a figure previously, like 10 to the 7th power, of what the entitlement scope could be for some organizations. So it's got to be a very simple way of getting it all in, right? It goes back to enterprise scope, bringing it in a simple manner, but also then being able to understand the data. We can bring in tons of it, but if it doesn't make sense to us, it's worthless, right? So we want to be able to collect it. We want to be able to normalize it, or maybe even humanize it. That's an interesting point. Great example would be, let's say that I've got a file share, and what I've imported as far as the definition is like a 256 character string AD definition. Well, if I give that to a director of payroll, that may not make a lot of sense to them. But if I bring it in and I say that this is, a payroll table for the Northwest region, well, that does make sense. So we normalize it, we humanize it, and then that gives us the ability to go ahead and define classifications of that type of data and who the owners are, which is going to fuel out efficient reviews, right? So visibility, very key, and understanding it. Now, once I've got this data in, then I can begin to apply some policies, some rules against what it is that we're trying to do with this entitlement information. I can begin to apply something like mutual exclusivity functionality, segregation of duties, things like that, be able to put in control objectives to meet my compliance needs, and better yet, put in something that through automation based on policy, I can really be effective in helping people come into the organization, change their access while they are part of the organization, and eventually assist them when they go to leave, doing all the cleanup. So policy sits upon being able to see and understand. Okay. Now we've got roles. This is fun. A lot of companies I've spoken with, they can kind of throw their arms up in the air now because they've tried to do role management a few times and it hasn't gone well, or as well as could be. Other organizations I've spoken to have their arms on it. They'll say, hey, we've got a small set of roles. They're very dynamic and they work well for us. We just need to refine it a little bit. Either way, once you've got the data and you've got some rules against how to use this, the data or access to that, then you can begin to put in the role and group management functionality, which really drives the automation. Once I've got roles and rules and groups defined, then I can say, okay, as people come and go into this, here are containers that I want to shift them in and out of, and I can automate that throughout their life cycle. Basically, as a great example would be when they come in, we give them one set of basic productivity as they move. Okay, well, we take some of these elements away because they no longer need those containers, and we provision them to new areas or groups of information as their access needs change. It's not so much anything evolutionary or revolutionary here. It's just using roles and groups in a smarter way that are built upon the previous two areas around using policies and around being able to manage data more efficiently. The last thing that we want to think about is really the fuel that drives the automation component, and that is request capabilities. Over the past few years, as IT has risen with a service-oriented approach, we've seen a lot of access portals. We've seen catalogs of this nature coming up and to be adopted by organizations on a very broad spectrum. But we think that for governance processes, the access request portal has to be something that has, let's say, some far-reaching tentacles into other areas, be they identity or access management tools, or into change processes and change management tools, and even into service desk environments, right? But it's something that is built upon policies, that understands change, that understands access change specifically. So here are the basic four groups, right? Being able to see it, put some rules around it, use some definitions of efficiencies with roles, and then being able to deploy out a set of tools and services that help the reviewers through their remediation processes, right? Now, what's really going to augment things, and here's where the change comes in, is that it's great to be able to do the access, but we also need to know that the task is being executed, that it's being executed as expected, and that I can actually report upon it at the end of the day. So access change fulfillment has to be an embedded part of these activities for the governance. It can't be separate. It's got to be that one-stop shop where I know that I can review, I can change things, I can instigate a request for change, and then I can follow that through to completion. Because at that point, then I've got full cycle validation. And that is key. That is the part that's been missing over the years, is this one environment that understands who can do what they should be doing, what's appropriate, what's not, and make those changes internally. Okay? Very simple pathway here. Now, what's interesting is that when we start talking about this, there is one key element, I think, that's going to drive everything. And this is something that for the IT folk that are out there, and some of their business constituents that understand technical services, business services, how they create service management, we know that the cornerstone of what is driving all of that is something called a CMDB, a configuration management database. And the way that that works, sorry for the lecture here, the way that that works is that it understands relationships between technical elements, right? Server is requested to a data store that's requested to some sort of web front end that users can access, and you put all of these different technical elements together, and hey, you've got a business service. Well, there's no reason why governance shouldn't have that same philosophy. And what's needed here to really drive the next wave of governance activities is an access management database that understands the people, the business, the roles, the rules, the entitlements, their specific needs of what they want to do and how they want to do it. Resident security systems, what are the endpoints? Where do these live? What are the access control lists that sit on those devices and those applications and those databases, and how does that all work together, right? So what you need is something that's purpose-built, that understands those relationships in order to drive all of these lifecycle controls. If we can do that, then we gain that granular extensible data model that drives that first column of the pathway I was talking about, and that was around visibility. Being able to see stuff, collect it, bring it in, whether I'm talking about users or their accounts or the actual entitlements sitting behind it. But more importantly, being able to see it at a very finite level, not just large definitions. And it's got to be something that will allow us to bring in business context. In other words, I know the relevancy of what I'm working on. Okay? And that's going to all come out of that XMDB. What drives us later, another benefit, is because this is like the first thing I was talking about, being able to address the entire environment from one particular solution set or group of processes or defined practices, right? If I can do everything in one area, well then finally I'm going to hit the efficiencies that I need. And because it's a rather intelligent thing, I can cut down on a lot of support as I try to reverse that 25-75% rule I was talking about by switching over into a 75-25% rule. Try to get as much managed as possible by using something that is defined and created for this specific task at hand. Once we do this, then we move into delivering to the business unit something that they can consume and use. And this has been going on for quite a while, trying to drive real intelligence, trying to drive some dynamic information where people can make very, very well-educated decisions about how to drive identity and access. And we've seen the need come up over and over again. We've seen the intelligent decision-making processes incorporated in other disciplines throughout IT and the business, and this is no exception. We need to be able to understand what's happening throughout the entire life cycle, whether we're talking about a request process, the remediation process, the validation process, and really understand the implications of those activities. Once we can do that, then we can start to actually map out some trends. And this is something we haven't really thought about for governance before, but a great example of trend would be, well, what happens if we acquire a new company? Or if we shift logistics from one geography to another? What is going to impact us when we put in a new data center? And we can start to think about how this affects our governance posture. Okay? And at the end of the day, this was a pretty good focus from the second podcast as well. What we're driving is a closed loop management set of activities, where we understand that remediation or review drives remediation, which should maybe open a trouble ticket in a service desk. Something that we can then follow through change management, because we need to do something that is larger scale than just a one-person activity. So we can chase something all the way back. In other words, if we're doing closed management and we're doing the automation, then we are doing an end-to-end lifecycle controlled process that has a really strong audit trail. And that is going to help us get to that next level of change management that governance should incorporate. Okay? So, little infomercial here, of course. We at Avexa, we think we've got this down pretty well. And we focus on really delivering all of this across the board, helping you collect, helping you scale out, helping you take actions, and helping you to validate, verify, and defend the actions that are coming forth from your governance activities. How does this affect you in your day-to-day life? Well, this is a great question. If we go down that pathway, we know that we'll be able to overcome a lot of obstacles we've had in the past. And this is just an example of like a typical review process that takes place now with a disparate set of systems. You've got to get your data from your applications, so you've got to turn to people to run extracts. You've got to format this stuff. You've got to do your own normalization and correlation of that data. And then you've got to bundle it all up, send it over to your managers, your reviewers, your supervisors, whoever it is that's part of your certification process. Maybe sometimes you got to send them 2 or 3 different notices that, hey, a review is due. And then you have to drive that over to actually doing the review process, which is a nice manual checklist for a lot of organizations. It's amazing how popular, let's say, spreadsheet review processes still are, but that's it. It's a manual set of activities. And then you've got the remediation changes, which are manual. And then you've got to execute the changes in all the resident security systems, which is manual. All of this takes a lot of time, right? So what we're talking about by introducing the automation and the technology specifically for governance is the automation of the preparation, getting all the data together, bundling it up, automating the actual review notification process, taking that, understanding who the right owners are, what categories that data is has already been defined, and we send that over to the managers to perform their reviews automatically, who can then use a centralized system and without spreadsheets and manual checks, go through, do the full life cycle, verification, ask requests for modifications, and then execution, all within one tool. What we've just done is removed all of the latency that can take, let's say, a 36-week review down to 6 weeks. That's pretty powerful stuff. So that was a very quick flyby, an overview of what identity access governance, let's call it 2.0, could be in your environment. If you want some more information, you can contact us at any one of these sites here or come visit us at our website, www.avexa.com.